Now, what's happened is that politics has become indistinguishable from advertising. That's exactly my point, Kyle.
Yeah.
I'm just giving you the facts is often bullshit, for
Mhm.
I am removing relevant complexity from a phenomena, and thereby I'm actually bullshitting you. I'm not
Yeah.
trying to give you the truth of it. I'm trying to present it in a way that will allow me to manipulate you. I think what the multiverse is doing, the MCU is people are attracted to it because it's picking up on that positive thing about there's a new way of thinking about what's really real. It's this dynamic inexhaustibleness, but everywhere, everything all at once is picking up on the nihilism, which is what we've lost perfection. We've lost what God used to be for us.
John, welcome to the show.
Great pleasure to be here, Kyle.
I know that you've discussed between you and me that you've been very interested in the meaning crisis in pop culture. And so I'm
Yeah.
kind of curious if there's any areas specifically in pop culture that have stood out to you or where you see the status of the meaning crisis in pop culture currently.
Well, one thing I've got to mention is, of course, the first book on this that Chris and Master Pietro and I and Philip Mizovic wrote on zombies, and we made the argument that zombies are a new myth, and they're properly religious myth in that people try to participate. They go on, they were, I don't know if they still do this, but for a while people were going on zombie walks, which were large,
Huh.
like large things, like thousands and thousands of people who would dress up and walk around as zombies. And this is a fairly new myth. And sort of tracing its history is interesting, but most people aren't aware of and don't need to be aware of the history. They seem to have this uh, automatic appreciation. And for a while, zombies were like everywhere. They're not gone. They keep resurfacing. There's a new movie out about it. But when you get that kind of fervor around something, and that's what we were trying to articulate, well, what's going on there? And we argued,
Hmm.
well, zombies are, a portrayal of the meaning crisis. They're not supernatural beings other than us. They are us decayed, literally
Hmm.
decadent. They don't have community, but they drift around in hordes. So they're like us. We're surrounded by many others, but we don't have a community. They don't have any shared history. They don't have any uh, anywhere they're going. They don't have a home that they come from. They don't have a place they're trying to go to. They drift. They aimlessly drift. In many versions of the myth, they are hungry for the organ of intelligibility and meaning, the brain, even though
Hmm.
they can't communicate or talk or do anything of significant intelligibility. Um, and they consume without satisfaction. They seem to be
Hmm.
trapped in sort of perpetual, what Fromm called modal confusion. They seem to be consuming, but to no end, to no purpose, to no growth, to no self-knowledge. And then we talked about how that particular myth also joined up with another well, modern myth in the sense of, the apocalypse. Now, the apocalypse is an ancient idea, but the modern myth was like a catastrophic uh, apocalypse, nuclear war, plague.
Hmm.
And then, of course, these two ideas came together, the zombie apocalypse. And what's going on there is also a profound echo, but perversion of the Christian myths. The zombie is the Christian myth of resurrection, which of course is
Ah.
baked into Western culture, but it's perverted and it's gone for something that we hope for, according to the Christian tradition, to something we dread. And the apocalypse is the revelation. In apocalypse didn't originally mean the end; it meant the revelation of a new and better world.
Hmm.
And then all we got was the smashing of the old world was all that got held over. And so you got these two powerful Christian ideas that have shaped our hope and our longing coming together and then inverted and perverted, which is we argued, a very profound portrayal of, in symbolic form, in myth, of about how the meaning crisis is sort of there looming in people, not necessarily in their explicit self-reference or in the day-to-day living of their lives, but there's an attraction. There's something that generates this. There's an attraction to it. People, like I say, they want to identify with it in weird ways, and it keeps on going and going. And so we said that we thought that we made a strong case that the zombies were a mythological, an emerging myth around the meaning crisis.
So I'm kind of curious how you might see looking at meaning and looking at the world through meaning in context of politics. I know you don't get too into the political conversations as well, but if we just speak on a high level, how you see that.
I'm very happy to talk about politics at the metapolitical level, at the cultural
Yes.
level, at the
And that's what
cognitive
I'm
level.
asking, just so you
Yeah,
know.
yeah, no, that's very good. So, I used the term earlier, and I want to be clear that I'm using it technically, which is bullshit, which from Harry Frankfurt. The liar uh, tells you something which she hopes you will take to be the truth, because your commitment to truth will alter your behavior. The bullshit artist does something other than that. They try to get you unconcerned about whether or not something is true,
Mhm.
and more invested, more caught up in how salient it is, how much it attracts your attention, how
Yeah.
much it arouses your energy, how much it triggers your affect. And so advertising is largely the world of bullshit.
Yeah.
So, when you advertise a product, my standard example is they're advertising a bottle of alcohol, right? It's a clear, clean, like very clean, nicely lit bar. It's very well lit. There's gorgeous people who are completely, clearly, completely sober. They're all around for some reason this bottle of liquor that's right in the center of the shot that's got, condensation dropping around. And they're all really interested in each other. And they're all just really like obviously sexually, prone. And it's just like, and that's not what a bar is like. You go into a bar,
Yep.
it's dimly lit. There's broken people in there. There's people trying to manipulate each other. Some of the people are drunk. Like bars can be very often unpleasant places, right? And they're not that. Um, Now, the advertisers know that you know that, and they're counting on you knowing that you know that, because when you know that, you don't care that it's not true. You go, come on, that's not real. That doesn't matter. They know you know that. Now
Hmm.
you're in the bullshit, because although you know it's not real, you're standing or watching, right? And you're caught up in it because of how catchy it is. It
Yeah.
catches you. It keeps catching you and catching you and catching you. And so now when you go into the liquor store, that bottle of liquor will catch your attention. It will energize you. It will arouse your affect, and you'll buy the liquor. That's why advertising works.
Hmm.
Now, what's happened is that politics has become indistinguishable from advertising, right? So we have moved progressively away from the centrality of debate, discussion, the careful argumentation for platforms or ideas. I grew up with a politics that was more like that. Even if I used to watch the House of Commons and the debates, and it was much more that kind of thing. Now, what we've got is it's all advertising. It's all bullshit,
Yep.
and people know it. They know it. So that anybody who, and this is the weird irony, anybody who gives the appearance of of being sincere, right? Even if what they're doing is clearly bullshit, they get attention because people want something that doesn't feel like bullshit and advertising to them. And so what happens is, right, when you get that arena. Advertising is about competition. It's about me selling and you not. And so what that does is that builds up an adversarial model. Whereas what the point of politics is for me to defeat you and destroy you. And it's a winner take all. And that puts you into what are called game theoretic, like prisoner dilemma stuff. And what do people do is they will automatically, inevitably go down to the lowest common denominator. Democracy was originally around the idea that you and I am your best chance for you self-correcting, and you are my best chance of self-correcting, because it's very hard for me to notice my bias, very easy for me to notice yours, and vice versa. And so and there's lots of evidence to support this actually being the case. So if we both commit to a process that has much more of our identity or an allegiance than our position, so if we commit to the democratic process over and above our positions, then we will actually make use of the intent of democracy. But if we don't, we replace that dialogical process with an adversarial winner take all combat within an advertising arena filled with bullshit. And what happens there then is you get this weird phenomena we have where people feel very disenfranchised from the political machinery, all the political institutions, yet everything is rendered political. Everything you do is
Yeah.
political. But at the same time, people distrust all of the political machinery. That that really terrific tension, what it does is it tempts people into a pseudo-religious participation. They strongly identify with their figures the way people do parasocial identifications with their media figures. Trump won largely because he went on some of he went on Joe Rogan, and people have a parasocial relationship with Joe. They act
Yeah.
as if they know Joe Rogan, and they can trust Trump if Joe talked to him. It's that kind of thing, right? And so you get a terrifically fraught, filled with fever and fervor
Hmm.
political arena, but underneath it, people really don't have faith that the system is working.
Yeah.
So you get American movies about Civil War, not the old one, but a new one, and they're massively popular. So that's how I think the meaning crisis is showing up
Yeah.
in the political arena.
Yeah, just so you know, I typically have on bullshit here on my
Oh,
mantle.
excellent.
That's
Yeah.
the one that's usually there. Because I think it's relevant to what we're going through right now. And the way I see it is this comes back to the meaning crisis and people not being educated in knowing how to look at things through the lens of meaning. If you don't know how to take what we're looking at in the world, the facts of the world, and put it into a meaning frame, then you're going to be more susceptible to bullshit. You're gonna
Exactly.
you're
Exactly.
gonna be able you're gonna listen to these people and just go along with it. And we're not being trained in meaning, as far as I can see. But we are being trained in understanding facts, and we've lifted up through hyper rationalization, being able to assess what is a fact and what isn't a fact, but we're not being able to assess how to interpret those facts.
I think you're right that we believe we can do that. I think there's a lot of great philosophy and cognitive science and psychology that says there are no facts independent of our judgments of relevance, importance,
Mm.
significance, connectedness to other things. Like Hillary Putnam made the devastating argument about the idea that there's even, like, people talk about this as if they know what a fact is. But you say, well, what actually is a fact? What do you mean by a
Yeah.
fact? And then you'll get what? It's like they worry about values that are subjective, but Putnam says, but well, what do you mean by a fact? Um, and in short, the idea is, well, what I mean by a fact is I have a single sentence that corresponds to some, very simple state of affairs, and that's what a fact is. And none of that picture works.
Mm.
None of that. There's no such thing as a single sentence that's meaningful to you. Right? There isn't
Mm.
anything like a simple state of affairs that you can just see. Like, well, I can point at it. What are you pointing at? Well, I'm pointing over there. Well, you're pointing at the cat. You're pointing at the cat's head. You're pointing that the cat's on the mat. You're
Mm.
pointing on the left side of the room. You're pointing about the fact that you don't want the cat there anymore. Like, and not only that, when you're trying to talk about what you're isolating, like everything is causally connected. So you're choosing which of the causes you're going to bring into your discourse, which ones you're not. The point I'm making is that idea that there is just sort of facts without judgments of relevance. Well, I mean, I've spent my career trying to argue that that doesn't ultimately make any sense. Um, and so I think that's part of the problem. Um, uh, I think if we were more aware of how interdependent relevance and facts are, that would help us pay more attention to the care at which those are put together. Because we don't pay attention to how they are bound together, we often simply smuggle relevance and meaning into what we are calling facts.
So people don't get confused with what you're saying, because I could see someone listen to that and say, "Oh, he's saying that facts don't exist."
I'm saying that I'm not saying that. I'm saying that I'm saying it's exactly the opposite.
Hmm.
That to try uh, that what you should do when you're talking about facts is talk about truth and causation, because that's what you're really trying to get at. You're trying to say I'm saying something true about the causal state of the world, and then is there truth about the causal state of the world? Yes.
Hmm.
But think about now when I say that, think about science trying to determine truths about the causal state of the world. They have to bring in complex theory, complex measurement, complex math. They have to do
Yeah.
debates and discuss right before the facts come out. That's all I'm saying. I'm not saying there are no facts. I'm saying the facts are not what your common sense tells you they are.
Mm. And I think that speaks to another point, is that so many political topics are way more complex than I think we give them credit.
That's exactly my point, Kyle.
Yeah.
I'm just giving you the facts is often bullshit for
Hmm.
I am removing relevant complexity from a phenomena, and thereby I'm actually bullshitting you. I'm not trying
Yeah.
to give you the truth of it. I'm trying to present it in a way that will allow me to manipulate you while claiming to be talking common sense or giving you the facts. That's exactly what I'm trying to put my criticism on.
Now is a good time to switch over to the movie we wanted to be discussing, Everything, Everywhere, All at Once. I
Yeah.
think there's a lot of themes in it that we can pick up on from our conversation we were just having. But I thought I would start with the premise and the myth behind the premise, which is having this multiverse, this
Yeah.
reality where there are infinite realities. And it's become popular lately. Once again, kind of like zombies, there's something about it that is attracted to people. It's come up with Marvel, another show, Rick and Morty, if you're familiar with that. And that
Yes.
show
Yes.
has a lot of the same themes as this movie. So it's kind of funny that the multiverse and the themes of this movie are being talked about in other spaces. But I'm curious, what do you think the symbol of the multiverse might be saying to us on a broader pop culture level of who we are and where we're at today?
Yeah, I think it points, although I've seen some recent work from physics that provided an experimental evidence and argument against the multiverse, but that's probably not relevant because it's a myth, as you said here.
Uh-huh.
I mean, the fact that it has a background of scientific legitimacy matters. Science fiction is where you should look for some of our most, you know, powerful attempts to create myth. Um, because one of the particular projects our myth has to undertake is to present myth within a scientific worldview or give it at least the air of scientific legitimacy.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Again, that's why the zombies take priority right now over other monsters because they sort of seem like scientific in some interesting
Mm.
way. Now, the multiverse, I think the multiverse is pointing to something really important, and it has to do with what I'm talking about right now, which is the advent of the sacred. Um, so I'm doing an online course. You're familiar, I think, with Einstein and Spinoza's God,
Yes.
and Spinoza, proposed a new way of thinking about God, which is, infinite, a number of attributes, each which is infinite in its expression. He was so, and all we can do is aware of is two. So
Mm.
he unpacked this sort of incomprehensible multidimensionality to reality. Uh, and there's something interesting going on there, and I think the multiverse is doing that too. What it's doing is it's giving us the idea of something opposite to what we got with the modern notion of the universe, which is the one verse, the universe, the
Mm-hmm.
self-enclosed system. And what the multiverse does is it breaks with that and brings about no, the reality actually is this self-transcending thing. There's transcendence built into the very fabric of reality. You can go from this dimension to another dimension, like they do in the movie, of course. Um, and now that points to something I think even deeper, which is a shift in the notion of what's most real. And I think part of what we mean by sacredness is what is most real. Sacred means what is most real, what is most orienting, what is most transformative.
Okay.
And part of what's going on here is we're moving away from the idea of a static, complete, finished, at rest notion, a perfection notion of sacred, to a dynamic, inexhaustible,
Hmm.
right,
Yeah.
notion of the sacred. What's most real is this inexhaustibleness, and it's dynamic, and it's active, and it like um and it affords just radical kinds of self-transcendence.
Yeah. So it's
And
interesting.
go
Sorry to
ahead.
cut you off, but it's interesting to me
No.
that you're framing this, at least tell me if I'm wrong, but you're framing this in a good sense. It seems like this is a move that,
But there's a dark side to it, that
all
which I
right.
was going to get to.
Okay. Yes. Yes.
So
Continue.
So what it is it's picking up on that side of the sacred. It's also picking up on the death of the old version of the sacred. And so
Mhm.
it's also seeing that aspect of realness as something that crushes meaning, that renders us potentially insignificant,
Mm.
because we are mere specks within this infinity, and nothing matters because every possibility is being actualized somewhere.
Yeah.
Um, um, uh, and so I think what the multiverse is doing is it's right. So the MCU is people are attracted to it because it's picking up on that positive thing about there's a new way of thinking about what's really real. It's this dynamic inexhaustibleness, but everywhere, everything all at once is picking up on the nihilism, which is what we've lost perfection. We've lost what God used to be for us, and what we're now adrift in this, in this incomprehensible vastness that renders us insignificant.
Yeah.
So
No, that,
that's why I think the multiverse is so popular. It picks up on both of those. Like a good myth, like the zombie myth,
mhm.
they always are they're always bivalent. They always have this two side, the light side and the dark side, to take a famous portrayal of that.
Before we get too much into the philosophy of nihilism and how they get to the resolution, it's depicted through this everything bagel, which is hilarious to me. I love that.
Yeah, yeah,
Um,
yeah.
and she put everything on a bagel and saw that it was all meaningless, is what they say. But one of the things I thought I would kind of point out is it's very similar to a symbol that has been around for years, the Ouroboros. I mean,
Yes.
it's one of the
Yeah.
most ancient symbols that you have. I think it's even, I would even say that's on your book, if
Yes.
I'm at
Yeah.
least a version of it. It seems like that was a symbol of meaning for ancient people. But here it's depicted as a symbol of meaninglessness. Where is the difference between the way the ancients saw this symbol and maybe how it's being depicted in this movie?
So it depends how you look at it, right? Are you seeing a process that is feeding off itself and thereby self-generating?
Mm-hmm.
Are you seeing the snake as constantly making itself anew by the way it feeds back on itself? Self-organization, feedback, and
Mm-hmm.
feedback. Hear the language, feedback. The
Yeah.
Ouroboros has that literally in it. Or are you seeing something that's consuming itself towards nothingness?
Mm.
You can
Wow.
look at the Ouroboros in it's like that, it's like one of those, Wittgenstein's duck rabbit or the Necker cube. You can look at the same thing in two radically different ways. Again, the bivalence of a symbol. And
Yes.
so I think that's what's going on. I think I think what I would say is the movie works symbolically. I think the philosophical arguments in it are incoherent,
Mm.
in a really radical and important way. But I think, but I don't think that's a disservice to the movie because I think the movie actually expresses a lot of the incoherence that's within a kind of nihilistic take on things.
Let's get into that. What do you think about where does it philosophically fall apart? What is incoherent about there? Or how did maybe start with how you saw their resolution and then break down where you thought it didn't actually come together and be coherent?
Well, I mean, that's a lot. The
Okay.
the resolution is actually, it's offering that it's offering this idea that our experiences of love somehow matter, um,
Hmm.
and and it's like, why? why is it that when we go to this particular kind of experience, we find the mattering that we find is not present anywhere else? And, and notice that that's really a weird thing to say, um, because it's clearly matters to Joy, right,
Hmm.
when she's the supervillain,
Yeah.
uh, that um, all of these facts are as they are. Like that makes a difference to her, and yet she's denying that reality has the capacity to do that. And it's like, what's going on with you? You look at reality, and then it has this huge impact on you, like. And notice you're smuggling something in. You're saying, "Oh, it really matters to me that I can't, that, the universe doesn't seem to be a home for me." And it's like, and where's that mattering?
Hmm.
Is that
Yeah.
in you? Does that really exist? Or is that another one of the things that doesn't matter?
Hmm.
Do you see what you're smuggling in something? And this is the deeper problem. The deeper
Hmm.
problem is these issues of meaning are bound up, and this is why wisdom matters. They're bound up with judgments about what's really real,
Hmm.
right? And real is a comparative, and meaning is a comparative. Significance is a comparative. To say that something is significant is to compare it to something else that's less significant,
Hmm.
right? It's like the word tall. It's not like the word red, right? Now notice the weirdness you're getting into. You're getting into all the individual facts are insignificant, and yet the total of them has tremendous significance. Namely, it has a significance for how you should understand your existence, which is, how does it do that? Where did that overarching? Well, it's more real. Okay. And so what you're saying is being in contact with more real is meaningful. There you go. There's your answer. Get in contact with what's most real.
Hmm.
You've
Hmm.
got it. Why are you feeling so mean? Oh, because there's all these possibilities. So what? Like that, there's a confusion about what meaning is. Now, what I think is being portrayed, though,
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
that's the philosophical problem. What I think is being portrayed is we are in a deluge of possibilities, and we don't know how to sift our way through them, and we
Hmm.
don't know who and what we can trust. Right? That's what that is picking up. There's just too much, and yet we don't know how to orient and sift our way through. We don't know in the everything everywhere all at once how to cut through the bullshit and
Yeah.
how to deal with the burnout. Notice that burnout, the movie starts with burnout, which isn't a coincidence, right? Bureaucratically enforced burnout, not a
Hmm.
coincidence, right?
Ah. Yeah. Yeah.
Right? And then right, and it's saying, okay, there's all of this, and you're burnt out, and you're beset by bullshit, and you're beset by authorities you don't trust anymore, and you don't know how to deal with it. And that, I think, is a very excellent portrayal of how people are bumping into the meaning crisis. The philosophical argument that is being used is, I mean, I'm just doing something that Thomas Nagel pointed out a long time ago. Most of these arguments are incoherent. They involve performative contradictions.
Hmm.
Not there's a lot of nothing but in the movie. It's nothing but atoms. Really? Who
Yeah.
are you to say that it's nothing but atoms? Surely you don't think you're nothing but atoms when you're saying it's nothing but atoms, because you're
Hmm.
trying to convince other people who are more than just atoms that they should take the truth and the meaning of what you're saying and alter their lot. Like you get performative contradiction after performative contradiction.
Yeah, yeah. It even
These,
invoked her action to seek out Evelyn and wanted to
yes,
kill every Evelyn in every universe. So there was something
but
there that
why? Yes,
actually,
exactly. Yeah,
uh-huh.
there was a narrative for her, and this was her way of connecting to the reality of the situation. It's pretty screwed up, but that's not the issue. Uh, and so, it's important to get that the arguments are not the drivers of this. They are symbolic expressions. They
Mm.
shouldn't be understood as the justifications or explanations. They're not. What they are is the way we try within a scientific framework to generate a symbol. We try to create something like an argument or a metaphysical argument or a physics argument in order to try and justify the symbol.
Before we move away from the philosophical notions of the movie, there was one other philosophy that people talked about with it, and that's being absurdism. And in the
Yeah.
movie, I see the power of absurdity being used. That's how they go and jump to another universe and gain this new power is they have to do something absurd. You see the villain, Jobu Tupaki, she uses it for evil. And then at the end, of course, they end up using absurdity for good. And the most absurd action, they say, is to choose to love and to choose to make meaning with those around you, despite life in the universe being meaningless. Um, I,
Okay.
I'm curious
So
your thoughts on that.
well, notice, first of all, notice the hidden thing that's going on there, the actual deeper thing, which is reality is absurd, and I have to conform to reality. So I have to identify with reality by becoming absurd myself. So
Mm.
what's actually driving it is not absurdity. And this is one of my critiques of Camus, is and he was actually a Neoplatonist. What's
Mm.
underneath it is this contact. Well, that's how I get back in touch with reality.
Hmm.
So reality is absurd. I become absurd. I identify with absurdity. I enact absurdity, and now I'm back in deep contact with reality. And that then says, well, you're right. You're actually depending on something deeper than absurdity, which is the actual
Ah.
engine of your meaning. You're depending on participatory knowing as
Mm.
the deep way in which you're getting meaning. So there's that. Secondly, um, absurdity is good because it points out, right, the kind of issue. It's not an argument. Absurdity has to do with a clash between perspectives. This is Thomas Nagel's point. Um, and the thing is, we can resolve that clash with an insight. That's humor. Humor takes us to the edges of absurdity and then resolves the perspectival clash with humor. And of course, they're playing, and of course, Monty Python made this famous. And there's, of course, lots of stylistic allusions to sort of Monty Python humor
Mm.
running through that movie in so many ways.
Yeah, yeah.
And then that makes you think about something. It makes you think about, okay, but uh, and then they try to do something similar with love. That love is like the possibility of absurdity, but it gets reconciled because you and your lover you have fundamentally different perspectives, but somehow you get a reconciliation, you get an interpenetration between these two perspectives, and we call that love. And same thing like with the humor, where I get an insight into a person, and I afford them to have an insight into me, and we keep doing that, and we can keep committing to it. Um, and so they're picking up on some of the important machinery about how human beings can deal with the threat of absurdity that's found uh, in humor, in
Mm.
love, and in participatory knowing. So again, what they're portraying to me is a lot more valuable than what they're saying.
Yeah.
Camus' absurdism is actually incoherent. We
Mm.
must picture Sisyphus as happy. Why? Like why? Well, he's heroic. What? What does heroism? How does heroism fit in to absurdism? And so this is why I think Camus is much better in his novels than in his essays. Like The Plague, I think is great because you don't have any philosophically satisfying argument, but what he portrays is he portrays people who are admirable in confronting the threat of a universe that might be indifferent to their fates.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I had the pleasure of going through that book with you in the Literature of the Meaning Crisis course, and so I would highly recommend that to anyone who's interested. Um,
Thank you.
yeah, and to wrap it up, where I personally saw, I happened to see the what it can afford, what the movie can afford in a particular scene that highlighted what matters. And I actually took it back to one of the very beginning scenes where she's at the in the tax building with the auditor, and the
Yeah.
auditor looks at her and says, "Nothing matters more than this right now. What could possibly matter more?" And then she gets sent into the janitor's closet where she's being told that there's a threat to all of the universe itself.
Yeah.
And the Alpha Wayman says the same thing. What could possibly matter more than this right now? And so she's pulled between this mattering on an existential level and then also pulled to the mattering of the particular individual, personal, everyday things that happen.
And that is the tension in which cosmic absurdity looms, right?
Yes.
Because right, you have your little you, we have we I'm not excluding myself. We have our little lives It seems so significant that measure well by meaning and life standards, but then we can zoom out to a cosmic perspective and our lives seem insignificant in comparison. Now, the point about that, of course, is the size issue doesn't matter. If I blew you up to the size of a galaxy, you wouldn't suddenly feel more meaningful. That's not the issue. That, as Thomas Nagel pointed out, what are we getting at? Well, think about this. When I'm in a dream, it's a little world that seems highly relevant and real to me. And then I move to the bigger world of waking reality, and it allows me to see what was wrong in the previous, what the
Yes.
biases and the illusions, right? All right.
Yes.
And that's what I mean about it being comparative, right? That's what people mean when they say they want to belong to something larger than themselves.
Hmm.
But then they worry that what if it goes large enough, it seems to undermine my egocentric commitments. But then what you have is you have a wealth of cross-cultural, cross-historical wisdom traditions that say, no, there are states, there are perspectival states of consciousness and traits of character and identity where you can overcome that kind of egocentrism and get a view that is Blake, to see the world in a grain of sand and heaven
Uh,
in a wildflower, to hold
yes.
infinity in the palm of your hand and spend eternity in our. And this is Spinoza too. You see the whole and the part and the whole, and all of that threat for absurdity, right? It goes away in something that's the most comprehensive kind of insight. And what that does, right, is it tells you that there is a way of dealing with the threat, the real, you know, perennial threat of cosmic absurdity, but it requires fundamental transformation. And that's the part that I didn't quite see the movie. They were playing around with it,
Hmm.
but it was too much like the Matrix. You're just sort of downloading stuff, right? Um, like what these traditions say is if you're willing to undergo and commit to a significant process of transformation that will have costs to you, you can get to a place where cosmic absurdity is not a viable threat to you anymore.
Thank you so much, John. For anyone watching, you can find John on YouTube. He's got his book that just recently released. You have the lectern where people
Yeah.
can go dive deeper and take part in
Yes.
online courses with you. Is there anything else I'm missing?
No, Kyle, that was great. Yeah, the book is available on Amazon. Very quite speedy delivery and so forth.
Yeah.
Maybe everybody keep your eyes out for my next big term project, which is the Philosophical Silk Road. So just keep your eyes open for that too. If I could ask people to do that.
Yes. No, definitely. Thank you so much, John. I appreciate your time.
Thank you, Kyle. This was a lot of fun. I really enjoyed it a lot.